You're listening to the Reversing Climate Change podcast by the team at Nori, the carbon removal marketplace. This is a show about the innovators and entrepreneurs developing solutions to climate change.
Tom, I have a pitch for you. This show's going out a week from today. Would it be possible to work with Ben and make this a grounded episode and produce this show?
For sure. 100%. 100%. Let me just give Ben a very quick ring.
Okay, yeah. Now this is very grounded right here.
It is very grounded. Hey Ben, how's it going? I'm sat here chatting with Ross from Nori and the Reversing Climate Change podcast. Do you want to jump on?
Hello and welcome to the Reversing Climate Change podcast. I'm Ross Kenyon. I'm one of the co-founders of the Nori carbon removal marketplace. We're doing something weird today. Tom Previte of the Carbon Removal Show and also of Grounded, which is his new podcast about starting a biochar company in the UK. You know, I feel like I've stagnated in some ways where I've stopped experimenting with the form. The form that I set up has been very straightforward, as you'll hear in the show, so I would avoid a lot of the post-production woes that previous video projects I worked on had fallen into. I gave this advice to Tom several years ago when he was starting the Carbon Removal Show, and he disregarded it very rudely. And he made a highly produced show with segments that is something that I always tell people to avoid, but it made for great radio. And I'm really happy that he did, because it made for a really great product that's something entirely different within the world of carbon removal and climate podcasting, at least as far as I've heard.
Ross, you know I am here right now. I am here speaking with you, so...
I mean, it's always a bit funny to do these kinds of intros, but yes, you were allowing me to prattle on a bit about you. You waited till I finished saying all the nice things, and then you decided to jump in.
You just kept going, you know, it just sounded so good that I didn't want to cut you off in your stride.
Well, okay, without further ado, here's the trailer for Grounded.
I set out on a mission to create a business that made biochar, explore the benefits it might have, and document the journey. But I'm learning that making a small change involves big challenges. Is the UK the wrong place to be doing biochar?
I don't think so.
But why does it matter if it's produced here or not?
It doesn't.
From where to do it to proving the business model. This is my very honest story of starting a climate business and everything I've discovered along the way.
You know, it may take a lot longer than you think, and there's a lot of other moving parts. So I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket.
Find out how it goes by subscribing to Grounded, a climate startup journey, wherever you get your podcasts.
I don't know why it's so difficult to talk about. Maybe it makes it more real, which in some ways is very scary. And I think hopefully in other ways I can find to be quite exciting.
Happy to have you here, Tom. This is Tom Previte from the Carbon Removal Show and Grounded, which is his new podcast. It's a great show, Tom. I've listened to all of it. I wish there was more. There's only 5 episodes. Come on, man.
I know, but you know those 5 take a long time. It's taken us six months of recording, just conversations back and forth with family, friends, whoever, and then 2 months of like just continually producing to get those 5 out. So it takes more than you think. Well, I mean, you know this anyway, Ross, because you've been podcasting for years now. But I think the average listener doesn't understand or isn't fully aware of like the production value that can go into these shows sometimes.
They absolutely do not know that at all. People ask me for advice on podcasting fairly frequently, and I say a pretty similar thing each time. But I come from a video background, and there's an impolite term for this, but it's called frame effing. But it's not bleeped in that way per se. But there's a tendency when you're in the editing bay to be like, oh, we can just like change like a millisecond here. Oh, we can add a little thing here. And before you know it, you've spent a lot of money, a lot of time. No one's going to notice this change for the most part, but the process just drags, and it's asymptotic to you. You never reach finishing once it's there. And so I set up Reversing Climate Change to do it the opposite way. You record an interview naturalistically. You basically get what you get in the can. And if it's good, then cool. If you sound kind of foolish, okay, maybe you can edit a tiny bit, but maybe that's just what it is. And they're not all going to be winners, and that's okay. But then the alternative is doing something like what you did, or what Planet Money or Gimlet's startup, which is very similar to Grounded does. But did you hear like that workload, that workflow for even producing 5 episodes, 6 months of recording, and 2 months of producing? Is that what you said?
I mean, I'm not a perfectionist. I'm going to say that right now.
That's not even at the
I'm not a
perfectionistic level
perfectionist.
either.
No, I know.
Wow.
I'm really not. I'm really not. But I mean, yeah, this latest show, I say 6 months of recording because I just had the idea for it about 6 months ago. That was, shortly after I had some bad news at work. I was made redundant, and so was looking at what I was going to do next. I started going down this path of biochar, which I'd been thinking about. And I just had in the back of my mind, like, it'd be great to just capture this content that I'm learning because I'm picking up so much stuff from so many interesting people. So at worst case scenario, I'll just have a bank of interesting content from conversations with farmers or, influential people in the space.
Farming is not farming now. Farming is a business. But farming used to be a way of life. And that's the difference.
If you're looking at this from a global lens, the UK is not an easy place to do biochar. There are a load of limitations.
And fortunately, it turned into an opportunity where we could get some funding and we started a podcast to document our journey. And so for the last 2 months, we've really been taking all of that content, which is probably about 50 hours worth of content. And we've taken that, condensed it down and chopped and changed it into 5 30-minute episodes. And yeah,
That ratio.
maybe a bit overkill. I don't know, but we're happy with it so far.
I just did a show recently with the subject of a Ken Burns documentary, and he was saying that the Ken Burns process is something like 100 hours of footage to 1 hour of produced finished product. You're like, wow, those editors, that's hard too. People often think that just record it and then deal with it in post. That's sort of a joke in film too. It's like, we'll fix it in post, we'll deal with it later. But I have a background in documentary filmmaking, and it's actually really hard to get, even if you have good footage, turning it into something that's a coherent story that someone would actually want to consume. It's like extremely difficult. There's a lot of creative decision making. It's invisible to the listener too. They're so spoiled. They have no idea the blood, sweat, and tears I'm sure that you're doing, you and Ben suffering, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. And I mean, I have to shout out my producer, chap called Ben Weaver-Hincks. He's a magician. Like, I came to him and was like, hey, Ben, I've been capturing all this content for the last few months. Obviously, we worked together on the carbon removal show. So he was like, oh, say, Tom, not more. What's this new idea you have? And fortunately, he kind of liked the idea of telling the story of launching a carbon removal startup and listened to some of the content that I'd banked and thought, let's give this a go. So yeah, hats off to him for the hard work he's done on helping me kind of put it together.
I didn't have 6 months to spend on an episode, but this was when I thought we could collaborate to make something a bit more interesting. Okay, this is a lot of effort that has been spent recording, conceptualizing, producing. We get this question at Nori sometimes too. Of all the ways you could spend your time, why creative media? I would be really curious to know what your answer is, both for Carbon Removal Show and also for Grounded.
Oh, big question. You stumped every time they ask you as well.
Yeah, it's hard to. Yeah, there's a lot to say about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's lots of different answers. I think if I try to condense it down, I think first and foremost, something that became really apparent to me in 2020 when we first started looking at this was that there was just such a poor lack of understanding in carbon removal, and being able to tell a compelling story in a very simple way, put it into lay terms, make it interesting for your average listener, for anyone, your climate conscious individual to your grandma who doesn't really kind of know what a podcast is. If you can make it engaging, then I think that can only do a world of good for the awareness of this industry. So I think there's a big awareness raising thing there that drives me when it comes to the Carbon Removal Show and Grounded and this new podcast. I think in the Grounded context, and for this new business that I've set up, Restored, the biochar company, I think it makes a lot of sense because firstly, of that awareness raising thing for carbon removal more generally, but then secondly, with these projects, you have a lot of lead time to build up for things. Like, I could put a deposit down on a pyrolysis machine, which is the machine we need to make biochar, and I'm going to be waiting, 3, 6, 12 months before that machine is ready. So I've got some downtime to sort things out, and that could be anything from finding my feedstock, building out partnerships and supply agreements, finding a buyer for my carbon credits. But at the same time, like I'm not physically doing the thing yet. So it made sense to put effort into building content. And I think the other piece for me for the grounded side of things that made sense was, I don't know, when I first started looking at biochar, I thought I knew biochar. I thought I knew carbon removal, right? Like I do a podcast on carbon removal. Therefore, I must know lots about it.
Be very
How,
careful what you say next about that, Tom, but okay.
but I guess like naively, I was like, well, I know about this. I know about biochar. And then, a few weeks in, I was like, holy like, oh, there's a lot more here that meets the eye. And so that sort of kind of shock for me, having been in the industry for 2 or 3 years, made me realize people need to know more about how these projects get set up. They need to understand the challenges around getting standards and certifications, machinery, supply chain. And I think that story isn't told ever. So I'd like to tell that story as well.
Very similar to an answer that I would have given Nori for a long time, was just chugging along, trying to get carbon credits out the door and finding ways to talk about things that people don't fully understand, or especially when we started, carbon removal was a much newer thing. And so we're just trying to educate people on what we're even trying to do and why it matters at all. I love the format of doing this, though, as a business starting up. I think one of the hardest interviews to do, maybe you agree with this and maybe you don't, but companies, as they receive venture backing, they get a little bigger, there's a tendency towards conservatism, and people don't want to be too vulnerable in a public space because they might reveal some. One of my favorite parts of the show that I ever had was, okay, I hope you're not going to blush, Peter Reinhardt of Charm, but I asked Peter a question about intellectual property and if he felt any difficulty with patenting BioOil's process, because Charm has as I understand it, a pretty large patent in that space. Peter has a software background. People in software tend to not they like the open source ethos. They don't actually want to be real patent focused. And I could tell that Peter was really struggling with the idea. He needed to, but he wasn't fully comfortable with it. And the way that he talked about that on the air, I respected that a great deal, because a lot of people would have given me a much more canned answer, and it doesn't make for good radio, and it doesn't make me trust them as a business as much. But the way that you go about it with Grounded, honestly, it made me want to buy biochar from you. Like, made me want to support you. I find myself connected to you specifically, not just biochar as a whole. I'm invested in you listening to this show. It's a really successful marketing tool, I think, for you. I think it worked on me, and I know the trick.
Well, I mean, we're selling.
Well, yeah, I guess but then again, I haven't bought anything yet. So did it actually work? Yeah. I don't know. It inspired good affection from me.
Yeah, I think just, I mean, it's something that we're thinking, like something that I think a lot of carbon removal companies face is like, how open do you be? How transparent do you be versus like, I guess, keeping a lid on things? And I think a lot of companies are towards the side of being, let's keep a lid on it. And I don't know, I've just taken a very different approach. And we have nothing special ourselves, right? Don't get me wrong, we have nothing special. We're just like, as things stand, we're purchasing a machine from a UK manufacturer in the name of Capchar, who have also got a bit of a turnkey solution for some of the software side of things. We're doing this on farm. We're sourcing biomass from local councils and other sort of like civil engineering contractors. We have no IP yet, and I think that's a journey that I would like to tell. Is like, we'd like to figure out what our unique selling point is, what our IP is, if we do find that, and I'd like to be able to tell the story of how we get to that point, because I think there's such a mystery. And I think everyone talks about transparency in this market, how transparent we must be and being open to, kind of lifting the lid on things. But I'm just curious. I'm just eternally curious and want the answers to things. And so I would want the answers to this stuff if I was on the other side. So I feel as though, being on this side, I should give the answers.
It's beautiful. It might be naive, but I share in that naivete with you. Like, I want it to be that way. We publish our methodologies under a very permissive Creative Commons license. If you want to use our DAC methodology or our Croplands methodology, you can just fork it, remix it, republish it. As long as you don't republish it under a more restrictive license, you can just run with it, because that's not the thing that we're trying to make money off of. We're not trying to make money off of gated methodologies or services like that. I think that's part of this is just, okay, so backing up 1 second, one of the episodes I just listened of Grounded, you're talking about how you've been seeking non-dilutive capital by way of grants and pre-purchases and not seeking venture investment, which is good because once you get on that C Corp way or whatever they have that's equivalent in the UK, and you have a board of directors and they want you, in many cases, to have intellectual property because if you ever seek acquisition, that's the thing that's being acquired in addition to the team in most of these cases, unless you have physical infrastructure or something else. Maybe you will because you'll have actual physical units out there. But they want to see that. So like the pressure is really there to not be collaborative at the level of intellectual property that we would like to see. So we might all talk a good game about that. We clearly, climate is pass fail. We need to all do it together or we don't. But there's also capitalistic incentives that throw a big monkey wrench into there too, where you're like, okay, now to please the people with money and corporate governance norms, now I have to do something that might not actually be in the climate's best interest. That's a really hard decision to deal with.
Well, exactly. We don't face any of those pressures yet because we're funding ourselves through crowdfunding we're funding our pilot project. Sorry, we are starting very small, and so we don't have those large pressures from investors because we're doing crowdfunding, we're doing grant funding, we're taking pre-purchase agreements or pre-purchase orders, and so that's enabling us to be, I guess, quite nimble in the way that we think about things and how we talk about things. But I think I did have a conversation with somebody in VC in the climate tech space recently, and kind of asked them that question. I was like, what makes a carbon removal company investable? And they're very clear, like, you need to be able to demonstrate that your solution is having X amount of impact in terms of removing CO2 from the atmosphere. It could be X millions of tons by a certain date. And that could be through you doing the removal yourself or through you providing software that assists that removal, providing some sort of intellectual property that allows others to do the same. Catalytic impact. And they made an interesting split between being a company that's venture capital sort of backable in this space and being a project developer. And like currently I see, currently the way that we're set up, we're just a project developer. We're sourcing a machine, we're sourcing feedstock from somewhere, and we're funding project by project. And that doesn't make us venture capital sort of fundable. And that might well be the path that we choose to go down. We'll see what happens. I don't know yet, but we're using the pilot as a way of figuring out whether we are a venture capital backable business, and if so, what is our IP, and how do we want to talk about that? Or are we just a project developer, which is still great in and of itself, but kind of, I guess eventually we'll need to make that decision. Hopefully we'll start making biochar first.
Yeah, I think it's nice because there's been so much criticism of the venture-backed model for carbon removal companies because a lot of them are used to outsized software company returns. And people, this is the cliche at this point, but moving atoms is more difficult than moving electrons, essentially. Doing things in physical meat space, different economics, different amounts of electricity needed. It's just not scalable in the same way, but the pressure to constantly be ramping up. I think we're going to see a lot more of the developer model. I've talked to a lot of people recently who are working on various types of project finance efforts because people realize there is this gap here. And even for companies that are venture backed, once you get an offtake agreement that is not bankable because you have no track record and you can't raise debt against many offtake agreements, then what do? You're just like, cool, I have an agreement for every year for 4 years, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to get there, or I have to raise venture capital in order to do that. But that puts me in a whole different dynamic that I might not even want for my company.
Yeah.
We need something like what you're describing. I'm glad that you may, if it fits your business model, may be trying to pioneer some of that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, well, again, it's so early days, right? We've got a machine on order, and we're hoping to start to break ground and make our first batch of biochar in the summer. But yeah, we're hoping to take those learnings and see how we can kind of forge a path forwards, whether that's smaller decentralized systems, whether that's larger, more centralized approaches with the unique approach to supply chain. I don't know yet, but like we're gonna learn as we go and hopefully document the journey, because I think that's what a lot of people want to know. I've had enough challenges trying to figure out how we get grant money and crowdfunding money, let alone going to institutional banks for our
that seems
project yet.
It seems like that's going okay for you, though. It sounds like you got what it sounds like you had one grant come in, at least as of my listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that we've gone about funding our kind of startup so far is, like I said, through non-repayable finance. So we've applied for a bunch of grants and we've done a crowdfunder, which is successfully just tipped over 100%. So I think we were trying to raise £30,000 on there so far, which is awesome. We had half of that has been matched by Cornwall Council, which is the local council, where we reside. They're really bought into the project, which is awesome. So yeah, kind of crowdfunding, R&D grants, local grants, climate grants, these sorts of things for like small businesses. And then pre-purchases. So, and then a bit of savings, a bit of my own savings or redundancy package, basically, is kind of what's gone into setting this project up. And, in total, we estimate that this pilot, we're essentially going to be removing around 100 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. If we were to run it for 12 months, which means we're probably producing about 40 tons of biochar. And the cost of doing that with the operations that we have and with the capex, so buying the machine and getting it set up, it's about 100 to 150,000 pounds. So, I mean, it's still not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than like machinery and kit and projects that I've looked at in the past when I was doing my research. I mean, when I was this is what blew my mind. In one of the episodes, we talk about finding the right machine.
Looking at machinery for a while now, you can get one machine that costs £20,000. Then you get another machine which costs upwards of €2 million.
Wow.
If you drop £2 million on a machine, what else would you expect?
Constant monitoring, 24/7 uptime, an automated feedstock hopper, an automated bagging system, a weighing scale, like everything.
Flat screen TV, make sure you can get the cricket on while you're watching.
It just kind of blew me away that there was such a big difference in price. And so, like, yeah, it's an interesting kind of approach we've taken to funding it. I don't know if many carbon removal companies have crowdfunded their first pilot project, but it made sense for us to do so.
Is it crowdfunding is it donations, or are they buying equity, or?
Yeah, well, so they're getting, I guess, yeah, like kind of like more like Kickstarter-y, so they get products if you depending on what you contribute, we'll send you some biochar, or we'll do site visits with you. You'll get access to the podcast, so it's a bit more of a Kickstarter type thing. Note, if we send you biochar, we can't account for that in our actual life cycle assessment. So like that biochar won't be counted in our carbon removal totals because we can't make sure that it's gone on, we can't guarantee that you've put it into your soils. But yeah, so we might need to make it a little bit more, for example.
I have a personal connection to the UK biochar scene, actually, which I recognize is rather small. But I was one of the first buyers, in my understanding, of the Earthly kiln. So
you bought one of those kilns?
We did a show about it. I still have it. It's in my garage. I actually should bust it out. I have a bunch of waste biomass, so it's time. But yeah, I felt like I tried it several times with people from work. Never quite got the full hang of it. To be clear, I think this was user error. I think what Earthly is doing is amazing and very cool, and I think I just need more practice. I find it's a little bit harder than people think to actually produce workable biochar. Which sounds like you had to do several weeks of training with the manufacturer, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of back and forth on really getting to grips with how we're going to work with this machine. But when you first hear about biochar, right, you just think, oh, that makes sense. I take some biomass, I stick it into a pyrolysis kiln or system, whatever it may be, and then I turn it on, and then I'll get biochar out of it. And in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that. You've got to think about the moisture content of your feedstock, your biomass. You've got to think about the residency time, making sure, like, we have a batch system, right? So if you imagine this big 3x3 meter, machine, a box within a box, and inside that internal chamber, we stuff our biomass. We switch it on by literally doing a small fire, and then that heats up the external chamber, which then warms the internal chamber to a certain temperature. Then you're getting syngases coming off, which then have to funnel back into the external chamber to then run that cyclical sort of burn process. And then you've got to watch it for hours to make sure that it doesn't go to too high a temperature so that you're melting the steel, or that it's not kind of dropping in temperature. And there are all sorts of things that you need to bear in mind, you know, when you're running these processes. It's not just as simple as like making a bonfire and putting some wood on it and getting some biochar out. Yeah, it's complicated. I actually have nightmares. I wake up at nighttime, I mean, having like panics, thinking about like, God, how's it gonna work? Are we getting all the wood, you know, all the supply coming in at the right time? How are we going to process it? What's going to happen after we've run the first few burns? What if the machine isn't working? Like, there's so many unknowns. And I mean, yeah, I guess that's part and parcel of setting up a new project, but I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I am too. I'm definitely excited to listen to actually once the machine gets turned on and it's time. That's probably when you're coming back with the show, right? I imagine delivery day is probably the tape's rolling. Yeah,
our plan is, I mean, yeah, the way that we've organized it so far is that the first season of this kind of grounded show documents, I guess, the founding idea of Restored, and getting to grips with the location, why we're picking Cornwall as our area to run with, the machinery, the financing, and the sort of pre-purchase stuff. And then the second series is going to be later this autumn, where we talk about the practicalities of running this thing. You know, by that point we'll have got the machine on site, we'll have sourced our feedstock, we'll have been producing biochar, and we'll hopefully be working with those farmers that we've partnered with, and then we'll go through that whole process of getting certified. So all of that is to come in the next season.
Sounds great. Where's the pasties and where's the clotted cream? Those are the only things people know.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Where is it?
It's a good point. No, it's true. Cornwall's got a lot going for it. It's a beautiful place. Like, I'm fortunate enough to spend a lot of time there when I was younger. So it's nice to kind of be spending more time back there again. And then I will be eating a lot of clotted cream and scones with some jam and pasties.
How's been the reaction from the biochar community? Because we have a running joke internally, especially in the meme lab, that biochar people are a special breed. They're I feel like they're the oddest of any of the people in the carbon removal as a class of people. I don't know what it is, but it attracts a very specific kind of person. Have you been welcomed into their arms?
I mean, first and foremost, since putting this out, I mean, we've obviously been speaking with people for like the last 6 months, and so have been communicating with a bunch of people in biochar, whether they're other project developers or academics and whatnot. And I think, yeah, you're totally right. It attracts a breadth and depth of character, and I think that is testament to like all the possible kind of uses biochar has, and all the possible ways that you can make it, all the possible feedstocks that you can use. You know, you could turn any sort of organic biomass into biochar if you had the right machinery and the right kind of process. So I think it just attracts all sorts of characters that have like these interesting, inspired ideas of how to make this stuff, and some are a bit bonkers, others make a lot of sense. And the community that I've at least been engaged with so far has been really positive, actually. Like, I've spoken to some of the largest biochar producers now in terms of kind of carbon removal deliveries and pre-sales and offtakes. And it's been really positive to hear their kind of feedback from what we're doing, which is, it's just really nice that you guys are talking about this in a candid, transparent way. And, you know, when we went through this journey a few years ago, especially at the stage where you're at, we really identify with some of the, you know, challenges that you have. And so far, it's been a nice, positive reception. Yeah. Do you guys get I'm curious, from putting something out there like this podcast, and obviously the years you guys have been doing this, what's like the craziest sort of response you've had, or like most memorable outreach you've had from a listener or from someone that's engaged with the podcast?
Well, there's been a decent number of those over the years. My favorite ones are the people that are still involved in the carbon removal community who got into it through the podcast. That isn't to say the podcast necessarily, like in some cases, it means the podcast introduced the idea of carbon removal to them when they wanted to work in climate and they made a beeline for carbon removal subsequently. And that's really cool. But I also just like being a step on people's way in. So there's a version of you reached out to us for advice about podcasting, and there's a version of reality where I was like, podcasting is full. Don't talk to me, Tom. We don't need any more carbon removal podcasts. Please just go do your job. And I think that's pretty wrong-headed because climate is pass fail. We need more content. The kinds of people that might listen to your show might, like the last couple shows I've done have been kind of odd, frankly. The show that came out today as of recording, what was it about? It was on the philosophy of science. So we read Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend, and not everyone's going to listen to that. Before that, I did a show about the Vietnam War and climate change and Carl Jung and psychoanalysis. That's not for everybody. There's been a bunch of shows like that where maybe I'm able to like bring people in through avenues like that. And
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of people have come in and into carbon removal, at least partially due to reversing climate change and carbon removal newsrooms.
Awesome.
I take a lot of pride in that. I don't know. What same question for you? Have you had anything like that?
Yeah, I think this is going to say this was a really odd thing for me actually. When I was out of a job like November or December last year, I had been spending a bit of time researching this biochar project, and ultimately, as you know, I'm now here committed to doing that, which is what I kind of wanted to do all along. But there was a period for a few weeks or a month or so where I reached out to the carbon removal network that I had. So I spoke to other marketplaces and registries and people within the industry, and had coffees and early stage interviews, quote unquote. Literally every single one of them was like, "Oh, it's weird hearing your voice because I've listened to you before on the carbon removal show." And I was like, "What?"
Welcome back to the Carbon Removal Show. My name is Tom Previte, and I'm joined as ever by Emily Swaddle.
Today we're going to be talking
there are senior people that are heads of departments at these amazing businesses that, when they were first hired or were first getting into carbon removal, they listened to the likes of the Carbon Removal Show or the Reversing Climate Change podcast. And that was a bit jarring for me because I was like, well, you're interviewing me for a role and you got upskilled on this industry partially because you listened to the show that we produce, which is awesome to hear, but also a bit jarring. I was like, well, but that was quite a cool, I guess, in a way, quite a cool moment to kind of have those sorts of conversations.
I love those ones too. Those ones are always kind of fun. They're like, wait, I know you're, oh, okay, I get it. Oh, I see your name. Okay, I got it. That's like kind of a fun thing. One thing I loved about Grounded too is that it made me want to start a biochar company. I was like, okay, so what if Nori doesn't work out? What would I want to do? And one of the things that is really interesting about biochar among all the other carbon removal methodologies is that there's many biochar producers. If you look at the leaderboard on CDR FYI, there's a lot of biochar represented in there. And the volumes are often smaller. The deliveries are higher because it's available pretty quick, relatively. And
yes,
it seems like it's one of those things almost like concrete, where since the LCA matters a lot, where you are in proximity to waste biomass or other things or other feedstocks. So it means that like it can take place in a very distributed fashion. It's not like I have to raise $100 million to pump into a reservoir, essentially.
Yes.
If I wanted to do this, what should I do besides listening to Grounded? How would I even evaluate if this is the right career move for me?
I'll caveat this by don't take my advice.
What? Why wouldn't I take your advice on that?
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, why would you? Who would do that? We're only starting one and doing a podcast about it. But I would say you can. This is something that I thought about. I've kind of gone back and forth on. I think you can map all day long. Like you can build a spreadsheet and work the numbers and kind of work that as much as you want. And I think at the end of the day, it's quite a knife edge business model, biochar production. And I think when you pour over like a spreadsheet modeling it so much, you might just get to that point where you just see it's too big a risk to take. And I would say do some of that, but also don't be afraid to take the risk and have a and start small. So you're not perhaps, purchasing a multi-million-dollar machine to begin with. But start small, learn your supply chain, learn where that feedstock's going to come from, build those early contracts, which is what we're working on right now. And then work on the other side, who's going to utilize your biochar, who is your customer at the end of the day, because you need that physical biochar to be used by somebody so it can be stored somewhere, whether it's in the soils or elsewhere. And I think, there's only so much modeling you can do before you just have to push the screw it button and just do it. I would say don't let that sort of like financial modeling get in the way of doing something meaningful.
It's nice. I like that advice. I'm gonna.
But again, don't take my advice. Do not take my advice.
Okay, okay, I won't take your advice. Against Tom's warnings, I kept picking his brain. I want to ask you about the directionality of biochar, because at least for now, you've said that you're focused on a more decentralized, farm-oriented model for biochar production. One of the long-time things I used to hear a lot, I think I'm hearing less of it now, was that there actually isn't a lot of availability for large-scale kilns being made in biochar. Just the sort of like tool and die shops have not yet started making the machines to make the machines yet. It sounds like maybe that's changing, but is there a future where there is going to be quite serious centralized biochar production, or do you think it's going to remain distributed like concrete is?
Oh, it's a really good point. It's a really good question. I mean, again, this is just speculation for me, but I do see a world in which there is both a very centralized model, so very large facilities removing, tens of thousands of tons, maybe more each year. And then there's a more decentralized model. Like, again, I think it very much depends on the geography. Perhaps a more centralized model works in regions where you're able to have that sort of large infrastructure. You've got large farms, large, single ownership land masses and areas where you can kind of get a facility set up and you've got all that biomass in that area. But then there are, countries and geographies where you've got very smallholder farmers, let's say, and they've all got small plots, and ultimately you need a sort of kind of community sort of biochar production model. And I guess like the centralized people may query and question the decentralized people on their approach when it comes to the efficacy of the biochar, for example, and like evidencing the LCA in the right way. Because there's a lot of challenges there if you've got hundreds of smallholder farmers producing biochar, for example. But I think I do see a world in which there are like sort of two types of biochar then. And I think there's a market maybe for both. But I'm very curious to see what happens to the sort of like pyrolysis machinery over time. It's weird because the climate doesn't really care in a way where
it turns
where that
out.
ton of CO2 is being removed. The climate doesn't really care, but the customer does. Like the companies do care. And so weirdly, they really, a UK-based company really likes the idea of a UK-based carbon removal project. And, I'll be the first to admit, we are using this pilot project as an opportunity, as much as anything else, to test whether we believe biochar can scale in the UK. And there might be a world in which that isn't the case, at least for us. And so therefore, we need to think about a plan B. And that could be looking abroad and working in a different geography, or it could be kind of doing something else. But we're using this pilot to figure that out. And so at least as things stand, kind of, this is a big learning exercise for us.
For us too, I think we came at this from a very a prioristic, rationalistic approach where, the climate doesn't care if it's produced here or there. We want this to be done as cost effectively as possible. But buyers want more than that in many cases. Buyers want those intangibles. They want the story. The line we used to say was that no one really wants to buy a barcode. I think that's true. I think abstract climate benefit is one thing, but I think people are oftentimes buying a story. And if that story means it comes from an idyllic part of the British countryside that you romanticize because of King Arthur and clotted cream and all of that, then okay, like maybe that is something that you should lean into rather than scolding them, be like, you shouldn't care where this happens. Like maybe it's okay.
Yeah. No, I think like, it made sense to do the thing where we're doing it now for various different reasons. And kind of, I guess we're leaning into that Britishness and want to really spread the project as far as we can. And I think not only for like to help raise awareness about us as a project, but also just raise awareness about biochar and carbon removal. Like I said, having spent a few years in carbon removal and then also a year and a half or 2 years selling carbon removal through the marketplace that I used to work at, I was blown away by how few people in sustainability, like heads of sustainability, knew about carbon removal. I think it shocked me that, and again, it is a bubble, it's a small industry, hopefully it's growing, but it just took me by surprise by how few people were aware of it, really, given how important, I guess, the IPCC says it will be come 2050.
That's a hard thing to face. That is indeed a hard thing to face, but I really respect the way that Tom is working on this. I like when people are doing their work in public and being able to show vulnerability and how uncertain so many of these things are. I think people think that it projects strength to not acknowledge how difficult these questions are. And when people do their work in public, I think it counterintuitively inspires a lot of trust. The kinds of people I trust the least are people who pretend to have all the answers and to have everything figured out. I think that's a scary ideological position to try to defend. And I really like it when I see people who are able to work through these things openly and with an open heart in that way that you can tell. I think that really shows strength in a way that people do not commonly understand or as business people use to their advantage. So kudos to Tom. Please go listen to Grounded. It's a great podcast. The Carbon Removal Show is as well. And they have an active crowdfunding campaign going right now. If you'd like to get involved in what Restored is doing, if you want to support British biochar production in the countryside, that's a great way to do so. And thanks so much for listening. All the normal ending notes here apply too. Ratings and reviews on Spotify and Apple Podcasts are very much appreciated. Thank you so much for listening and have a lovely day.
Thank you so much for listening. If you could please subscribe and give us a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify, that'd be much appreciated. It helps us get our content out to more people. You can sign up for our newsletter at nori.com, follow us on social media, and we will catch you next time.